Dr. Fai has also been an editor-in-chief of the Washington-based Kashmir Report, and in 1983 became the founding chairman of the London-based International Institute of Kashmir Studies. Dr. Fai holds a PhD in mass communication from Temple University, Pennsylvania, and an MA from the Aligarh University in India. He has been an invitee at several international conferences, including several United Nations conferences, as well as the European Parliament. He was invited to present a paper in 1993 on the Kashmir, at the Kashmir Roundtable. He has been a leading spokesman for Kashmir over the last 2 decades, and he has been exiled from Kashmir since 1980. Dr. Fai.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The topic that was given to me for this evening is the urgency of peace in Kashmir. The topic is very important. It is very significant indeed. Not only because it concerns the 13 million people of Kashmir who live under India and under Pakistan, but because it touches the lives and the future of more than 1.2 billion people of South Asia, that is home to 1/5 of total human race. But before expounding on the subject, please allow me to say just a few words about the latest situation in South Asia. Very recently, both India and Pakistan, they gathered more than 1 million troops along the ceasefire line. That is the largest military buildup within the past 30 years. The chief of CIA and many important policymaking agencies, they testify that any unintentional spark would lead both India and Pakistan to the brink of nuclear confrontation. So today, in this evening, I feel that it is our collective responsibility to find out what is the underlying cause of this military buildup in South Asia. What is the source of friction of the tensions between these two neighboring countries? What is the bone of contention of the nuclear confrontation between India and Pakistan? To find out the answer, you really do not need to go into research, because the answer was given by an agency no less important than the P5, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, which met in June of 1998 in Geneva, soon after India and Pakistan became nuclear. That exactly they wanted to know, what is the source of friction between India and Pakistan? So ladies and gentlemen, it is their conclusion, the conclusion of P5, that one of the most important underlying causes, the source of friction and the bone of contention of the nuclear confrontation between India and Pakistan is the dispute over the issue of Kashmir. The time is very short. What is the demand of the people of Kashmir? The demand of the people of Kashmir is very simple to understand. They would like to remind the government of Pakistan. They would like to remind the government of India. They would like to remind the international community of their pledges, of their commitments, of their promises, which they have given not only to the people of Kashmir, they have given those promises to the international community. And what are those promises? The theme of all these promises is very simple, that it is not up to President Pervez Musharraf of Pakistan to decide the future of Kashmir. It is not up to Atal Bihari Vajpayee to decide the future of Kashmir. The theme is very simple, that it is up to the 13 million people of Kashmir, whether they are the Hindus of Kashmir, whether they are the Muslims of Kashmir, whether they are the Buddhists or Sikhs of Kashmir, whether they live in Indian side of Kashmir or they live in Pakistan side of Kashmir. It is only up to the 13 million people of Kashmir to decide the future of Kashmir. Dr. Sen raised a very important points over here when he was referring to the position of India. He said India says that it is the integral part of Kashmir is the integral part of India. He said that India said we will not let Kashmir secede from India. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you the fact of the matter is Kashmir is not the integral part of India. The truth of the matter is Kashmiris are not separatists. The fact is Kashmiris are not terrorists. And the fact is that Kashmiris are not fundamentalists. Why I am saying what I am saying is because under all international agreements, I do not know whether you know or not, there are 17 international agreements over the issue of Kashmir of the United Nations. Some of them have been passed by the Security Council. Some of them have been passed by the commission that was set by the Security Council, which is known as United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan. One of the most important members of that commission was the father of Dr. Madeleine Albright, Professor Joseph Corbel. By the way, Professor Joseph Corbel, according to Dr. Condoleezza Rice, when she was asked who was the person who have had the most important impact on your life, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, she is the National Security Advisor, she said Professor Joseph Corbel. So according to all these international agreements, these were the agreements which were agreed upon by both India and Pakistan. These were the agreements which were negotiated by the United Nations. These were the agreements which were endorsed by the Security Council, as Dr. Mohideen mentioned. But more importantly, these were the agreements which were accepted by the international community. The theme of all these international agreements, this is the map of the United Nations. The theme of all these international agreements today on April 10th of 2002 is that Kashmir does not belong to any member state of the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, you really do not need to be an Einstein to understand. If Kashmir does not belong to any member state of the United Nations, then the claim that Kashmir is the integral part of India does not stand. If Kashmir is not the integral part of either India or Pakistan, then how can Kashmiris secede from a country like India to which they have never acceded to in the first place? So the people of Kashmir cannot be termed as separatists or secessionists. Are the people of Kashmir terrorists? Ladies and gentlemen, that's the last thing the people of Kashmir would like them to be known in the international community. There are many occasions in Kashmir. Virtually the whole population of the capital city of Srinagar, Dr. Zutshi, she comes from that beautiful land, city of Srinagar. Virtually the whole population coming on the streets, marching towards the United Nations and submitting the petitions to the Secretary General of the United Nations. India Abroad. It is the newspaper of Indian Americans published from New York. India Abroad in one of the dispatches writes, more than 2 million people, they were in a procession, and until that day they have submitted more than 400 petitions. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 million people cannot be instigated by somebody in the capital city of Islamabad. 2 million people reflect the true nature of the Kashmiri freedom struggle. That is, it is peace-loving, that is, it is indigenous, that is, it is spontaneous. And more importantly, if according to India Abroad, the people of Kashmir submitted more than 400 petitions. Ladies and gentlemen, you have seen the nature and the mindset of a terrorist. A terrorist does not believe in the mechanism and the system of the United Nations. If according to India Abroad, the people of Kashmir submitted more than 400 petitions, that means they still have the faith. That means they still have the hope in the mechanism of the United Nations. A terrorist does not believe in the petitions and memorandums. A terrorist does not believe in the pieces of papers. Are the people of Kashmir fundamentalists? Ladies and gentlemen, I can prove it, that the term fundamentalism, it is quite inapplicable to the Kashmiri society. I truly agree with Dr. Zutshi. She and I, we belong to a culture that is known as Kashmiriyat. One of the proud distinction of Kashmiriyat has been the sustained tradition of tolerance, the sustained tradition of amity, the sustained tradition of goodwill, the sustained tradition of brotherhood between Hindus and Muslims. Ladies and gentlemen, here in America, when you say founding fathers of America, it is George Washington, it is Thomas Jefferson, it is James Madison. In Kashmir, when you say the founding fathers of Kashmir freedom struggle, who comes to your mind? Ramchandra Kak. Ramchandra Kak, he was one of the founding fathers of Kashmir freedom struggle, but he was not a Muslim. Ramchandra Kak was a Kashmiri Pandit, Kashmiri Hindu. Ramchandra Kak was not a man on the street. Ramchandra Kak was the Prime Minister before the partition of Prime Minister of Kashmir, before the partition of India into India and Pakistan. As the founding fathers of Kashmir freedom struggle, what comes to your mind is Prem Nath Bajaj. Prem Nath Bajaj was not a Muslim. Prem Nath Bajaj was the leader of the Kashmiri Pandits and Hindus. He was a historian known not only in Kashmir, he was the respected historian known in the whole South Asia. Who comes to your mind is Professor Raghunath Vaishnavi, an orator, a writer, a scholar, who said only in 1997 in New Delhi, I have him on the video, he said, is it a crime? He's a Hindu leader. He is my leader. He said, is it a crime to become the shapers of our own society? Is it a crime to become the makers of our own destiny? Let India, Pakistan, and the Kashmiris sit. Ladies and gentlemen, why Ramchandra Kak? Why Prem Nath Bajaj? Why Professor Vaishnavi? They were the founding fathers of freedom struggle. Because to them, as to me, Kashmir has not been the border dispute between India and Pakistan. It was never a fight between Hindus and Muslims. It was never a struggle between theocracy and secularism. It was never an issue of autonomy. Kashmir has always been about the destiny. It has been always about the future. It has been always about the lives of the 13 million people of Kashmir. Now what needs to be done? So simple. I do not know how many of you know Senator Tom Daschle. He is the majority leader in the Senate. The people of Kashmir do not want anything more than what he said only last month in New Delhi. Senator Tom Daschle said, the time has come. India, Pakistan, and the people of Kashmir should sit together. The fallacy has been that America, that United Nations, that European Union, they are persuading President Musharraf and Atal Bihari Vajpayee to meet and discuss the issue of Kashmir. No rational person can understand that. They want them to decide the future of 13 million people of Kashmir without giving the people of Kashmir the right to sit on the table. So the time has come when Secretary Colin Powell is going to talk to President Musharraf and Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Obviously, he has to tell them to talk. But when they have to talk over the issue of Kashmir, then they have to include the legitimate leadership of the people of Kashmir into the talks. And finally, these talks are not going to succeed unless we will accept what Senator Lieberman said. Again last year, Senator Lieberman was the vice presidential candidate of Democratic Party. He said there must be some special envoy that must be appointed by President Bush. That exactly is missing. But third-party mediation does not necessarily need to be America. Third-party mediation does not necessarily need to be United Nations, Dr. Mahyuddin. But third-party mediation has to be a person of international standing. It has to be a person like President Carter. It has to be a person like Lady Thatcher. It has to be a person like Dr. Nelson Mandela, who can bring India, Pakistan, and the Kashmiri leadership together. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, when I met Senator Dianne Feinstein, the senator from California, she asked me, what do you want? I told her, Senator, when India and Pakistan, they are going to meet and they are going to discuss the issue of Kashmir, the Kashmiri people would like to be the part of negotiations. Senator Dianne Feinstein, she said, but you are not asking much. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, Dr. Parikh, is not here, so we will go to our last speaker today, who is also our keynote speaker, Minister Councillor Masood Khan. He is currently the political counselor at the Pakistan Embassy in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Masood Khan has been a career diplomat of Pakistan with an experience of 21 years. He has served in China, the Netherlands, New York in Pakistan's permanent mission to the United Nations, and Washington, D.C. He's also worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Islamabad, and he's dealt with several issues dealing with security and non-proliferation issues, human rights, and social developments. He's been in many countries, also studied Chinese at the Beijing Language Institute, as I noticed in his CV. He's had a teaching experience as a lecturer, taught English literature prior to taking on the diplomatic career. He taught English literature to postgraduate classes at the Allama Iqbal University in Islamabad, and has had also experience in radio and television, used to compute some of the radio and television distance learning programs, and also was an English newscaster for Radio Pakistan in the 1980-81. He has an MA from Punjab University and a BA in economics and political science from the Punjab University as well. Minister Councillor Masood Khan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm the last speaker, and you'll give me 20 minutes?
Absolutely.
But they are all my captors. So, I mean, because of the lateness of the hour, I'll be merciful. I'll probably conclude my remarks in 15 minutes. I'm not sure if I would reach out to the people here today on the issue of Kashmir, because the opinion is divided, particularly those people who come from India or Pakistan, because they usually have monologues, parallel monologues. They never have a dialogue. And I was a bit disappointed, as a matter of fact, when I listened to different presentations. Although, this is not a reflection on the panelists. What I'm saying, that this is a set pattern. This afternoon, when I was talking to Dr. Hurst, your chair of the Department of History, he raised a question about stereotypical behavior of Pakistani delegates and the Indian delegates. And I said that most of the time, Indians would say that the problem doesn't exist. If their attention is drawn to the problem, they would say, well, it's not Kashmir, it's terrorism, or it's fundamentalism, or it's secessionism, or it's something else. Compare it to something very nasty. Trash it, because this is not a problem that exists. Pakistanis, they would, of course, quote the United Nations resolutions, and they would defend the right to self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. But we have never been able to talk to each other. We have been talking past each other, but we have never talked to each other. That's an irony and a tragedy. As somebody, one of the panelists who mentioned here, that we have so much in common and we can transcend these differences. We have not been able to transcend these differences for the last 50 years. It's a tragedy that's still with us. Now let me talk as a representative of the government of Pakistan. I can tell you that what we cannot accept is reductionism, or a scenario in which you say that everybody is committing atrocities. The Indians are committing atrocities, the Indian troops. The Pakistanis are doing horrible things. They are militants who cross the line of control and commit terrorist acts and so on and so forth. This is equalization. This is the fallacy of equalization. In all fairness, you have to hold the actor who is responsible for this mess, and that is the Indian government, successive Indian governments, for God's sake. They have occupied their territory. They want to maintain that illegal occupation over their territory by all sorts of means. I mean, it can be electoral fraud, it can be coercion, it can be economic inducement, it can be persuasion, but the objective is clear. The land that was occupied in 1947 would always remain part of India. That's the objective. If somebody talks about it frankly and candidly, one can understand it. One can understand it. And there are all sorts of arguments that they would use. Well, if you give freedom to Kashmiris, this would have a domino effect on other states because it would encourage centrifugal forces all across India. One would understand that argument. I would not, but an impartial observer would understand. Then, of course, about religion, because they would say that India has the largest population of Muslims, second probably to Indonesia and Pakistan. One can understand that argument. But this question has to be settled. I'll tell you why this question has to be settled. It's a matter of time. It might take decades. It might take a century. I don't know. It should be done sooner than later. It has to be resolved. What is Kashmir about? Incidentally, I come from Kashmir myself, from the part which is called Azad Kashmir. And I would like to respond to some of the remarks made by Dr. Zucchi in her excellent presentation. But I'm not doing this to soften the blow. But let me tell you that Azad Kashmir has dual citizenship. They have Kashmiri citizenship and they have Pakistani citizenship. I enjoy both citizenships. Azad Kashmir has a president and a prime minister and a parliament and a Supreme Court. And all these trappings of a sovereign state are there in anticipation of the plebiscite to be held by the United Nations. All the trappings are there. Incidentally, we are not under occupation. The people of Azad Kashmir are not under occupation. Their literacy rate is higher than that of the entire population of Pakistan. Their per capita is higher than the people of Pakistan. We started from scratch, as a matter of fact. I mean, in 1947, we started from scratch. All our major towns started from scratch. We've had political freedoms. We have political parties. And there has been no interruption in elections in Azad Kashmir since 1970. There have been elections and there have been representative parliaments there. I'm arguing against reductionism, as if everybody everywhere is responsible, so that it's a muddled picture that you have. No, for God's sake. The repression committed by the Kashmiris is there. I mean, the terrorist acts committed by Kashmiris, that has to be condemned. Even one terrorist act or the loss of one human life is a horrendous crime. You cannot condone it. But then, when the Indian troops kill 70,000 people with impunity, and they burn townships, and they detain people, and hundreds of thousands of people are dislocated or displaced, or there are disappearances, or there are extrajudicial killings, or there's inhuman or degrading treatment of people there. You can't gloss over it. There's a report, as a matter of fact, I have recently seen a report by the Indian Human Rights Commission. Indian Human Rights Commission also gives a graphic account of the atrocities in Kashmir. And I can tell you that the conscience of India is alive, because the atrocities in Kashmir, the repression in Kashmir, initially and consistently has been reported by Indian non-governmental organizations and human rights activists. This is not something that we are fabricating from across the border. This is something which has been brought to the attention of the international community and to the leaders of Indian polity by Indian human rights activists. Kashmir is about freedom. As Dr. Fay said, Kashmir is about the realization of the right to self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, 13 million of them, in a territory which is about 85,000 square miles. This right has to be recognized by India, by Pakistan. Now, let me talk about the post-test situation, as we call it, and the post-9/11 situation. Post-test, which is May of 1998. I don't want to go into history, particularly to 1971. I'll just make a brief reference. In 1971, when India brought about dissolution of Pakistan by abetting and assisting, and then abetting and assisting terrorism first, and then invading the territory of East Pakistan, Pakistan was very vulnerable. Immediately after that, India decided to conduct its nuclear test. Well, not immediately, it was in 1974. They decided to conduct their first nuclear test. It was a proper nuclear test. For years, India would say that it was a peaceful nuclear test. It was called Smiling Buddha. It wasn't a Smiling Buddha. It was a proper nuclear test. Because of the loss of East Pakistan, we were very, very vulnerable at that point. And therefore, we also decided to develop our nuclear capability, defensive, deterrent, to deter India's aggression. I have referred to this because there's a long history of proliferation in South Asia and the set of sanctions that it triggered from Washington and other capitals of the world. May 1998, you have a new situation. The NPT regime has been undermined completely by the Indian test. Pakistan had to respond, as a matter of fact, to establish our own credibility, and we tested. And now there is a new dimension to the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. If there is no resolution on this issue between the two states, there could be a nuclear war between the two countries with disastrous consequences for both India and Pakistan and for the rest of the world. And it's at that point that the international community and the United States, not only the official circles, but also non-officials, academics, opinion makers, historians, incidentally, everybody became interested in some sort of a settlement of the dispute. Because if you do not resolve the dispute, you have a nuclear flashpoint in South Asia. And this is too dangerous a policy to pursue. It was at that point that the United States got heavily involved in what I would say triangular diplomacy, because they were conducting negotiations with India, with Pakistan, and of course they were facilitating or trying to facilitate a dialogue between India and Pakistan. What was the objective? The objective was that both nations should be persuaded to elaborate a nuclear restraint regime. There can be accidental launches. There can be unintended launches. Somebody, some actors had to communicate with each other to avert that possibility. Kashmir was the flashpoint. Kashmir is the flashpoint. Let me come to the solutions now. I'm presuming, as a matter of fact, that most of you are very well read on the region. Thank you so much for coming and taking time to attend the session on Kashmir. That's flattering for most of the Pakistani diplomats and for the Kashmiris, that so many people would come and listen to presentations on Kashmir, as a matter of fact. I mean, we think that that's part of the victory that we can claim. Now, but let me talk about the solutions, the possible solutions. First, I mean, I think Dr. Fay briefly mentioned that we have a very tense situation along our borders. I don't want to go into its history, but right now, and this started after December the 13th, that India accused Pakistan of masterminding a terrorist attack against their parliament. We denied responsibility. We condemned that attack. And we said, look, terrorism in all its forms and manifestations is condemnable. And let's have a joint investigation. Let India and Pakistan collaborate with each other in investigating who the perpetrators of that crime were. And if you don't trust us, we're ready to collaborate with the FBI or any other agency that you're ready to trust. They rejected that, of course, out of hand. But that attack, understandably, I'd say understandably, incensed and angered India. They started massing troops against Pakistani borders. And they pursued brinkmanship which was beyond our comprehension, which was fraught with dangers. And this could have derailed the United States or the United States-led war against terrorism. Even today, the situation is very tense. Solutions of Kashmir. What is the solution? I mean, I have very simple solutions in mind. What you need is the political will to work towards them. First, put an end to the repression in Kashmir. This would end the cycle of violence in that territory. Who can do that? It's basically, first and foremost, New Delhi. They can put an end to it. This would be the biggest confidence-building measure towards a solution. Then, of course, talks. Either we can have bilateral talks or we can have multilateral talks. And we understand, I mean, we know, we're familiar with Indian reservations and objections. They can't have multilateral talks. Why can't they have bilateral talks? I mean, we've been urging Prime Minister Vajpayee and, of course, Jaswant Singh to come to Islamabad or invite us to. Of course, we were there in Agra last year, but we are ready to talk. Let's say we have stated our maximalist positions, India and Pakistan. Our maximalist position is that Kashmir should be a part of Pakistan. India says that it's an integral part. Of course, these are stated positions, well understood. Now, how do we move beyond that? We have to have a process. We have to have negotiations. India should stop stalling negotiations. We should have a process, a credible process, and we should have a substantive and a structured dialogue so that we can move towards a solution. I'm not saying that we should prejudge the solution, we should demonstrate flexibility, and we should try to move towards a solution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. The question of the United States' role, it has been debated. In fact, last weekend there was a conference in South Asia in Washington, and in which lots of South Asian experts had participated. And India says no mediation, no facilitation, because this would be tantamount to recognizing that there is a dispute. Pakistan says that first we should try to sort out our differences through a bilateral dialogue. If it doesn't succeed, for God's sake, then let's involve a third party, Washington, or the United Nations, or Norway, or somebody else, or a credible figure, as Dr. Five was saying. Now, I think that I'd like to conclude here. And I want to leave you with the impression that in all these presentations, we tend to lose sight of the suffering of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Men, women, and children. They have been trapped in this war for the last 50 years. And they have suffered enormously. I think that academics can do a great service by giving the right counsel to Islamabad and New Delhi and to Washington. What happens is that academics from our part of the world, they usually hark back to New Delhi and to Islamabad, and we try to rationalize different permutations and combinations of our official policies. This doesn't serve any purpose. When you have listened to our positions, official positions, which sometimes have to be rigid and flexible purposefully, because you make concessions during negotiations, not before negotiations. Academics and scholars can come up with imaginative and innovative solutions for a problem which looks intractable. Thank you so much.